So this is a story map because this was the best way for me to, I thought, convey the message to today. Here's 3 pieces of advice as we get into the education sphere. Don't stop at the map, whether you're in the workplace or whether you're teaching an adjunct class or whether you're full-time faculty or wherever you folks are in, or teaching a course in your own organization, in your county government. Don't just stop at the map. Hey, Joseph, I get this often. I've got my data on the map, and that's great. And here's my URL. And I'll say, that's terrific. And now I don't say that to come down on people, but maps, the geospatial technology is only a piece of the higher, more noble goal. When the higher, more noble goal is understanding and taking action, making wiser decisions. Getting the data into a map is an important step to be sure. Doing spatial analysis, all that is actually important. But don't just stop at, I've got my data on the map and it's all good now. And also I would encourage you, some of you probably know what this is. This is now a doorstop in a high school where I was conducting a geotech club after school. And I couldn't resist taking a picture of this. Some of you know that this is an old Mac 2E, I think it is. Maybe some of you know exactly what the model is. But the point is, in the late 1980s, this was about $3,000 or $4,000. It was a treasured part of someone's IT infrastructure. Now it's a doorstop. The point I'm making here is don't get too attached to the tools. I know you people, but I just want to reiterate it because the tools change, right? ArcGIS Online updates quarterly. What happens in, going forward if it updates monthly, weekly? How do you grapple with change in your graphical user interface? Some GIS tools really don't have a traditional GUI at all. Maybe some of you have used ArcGIS Insights. That really doesn't have a traditional GIS interface at all. And with some of the GeoAI tools coming online, it's really rocking the boat in terms of, do we really need to know this whole tool set and where things are in the GUI? Also, I would submit to you, as we think about what needs to happen in GIS education, is that all 3 of these, what I call the stool of geoliteracy, actually matter. It's not just the skills, and even the skills are not just GIS skills. They're how to frame a problem, how to ask insightful questions, how to gather data and assess data quality, all those skills. Content knowledge matters too. Natural hazards, population change, urban dynamics, zoning, all that content knowledge that you folks have gathered over the years, that actually matters. And I would encourage you, if you're applying for a GIS job, to not neglect the content knowledge. Many people can learn GIS software. Don't just focus on the GIS skills, okay? Also think about where you want to focus. You can't focus on every piece of content knowledge out there. You've got to have a certain set of domains that you're expert in. And finally, the geographic perspective matters, even if you're not a geographer. Okay, if you're a planner, if you've come into this from computer science or some other field, the geographic perspective still matters because you're thinking spatially and about patterns over space and time. Now, no surprise to you at the ILGISA community, but I just like this set of phrases to indicate how GIS has changed. You can read this just as well as I can. But it's going to be, I wanted to include it in this story map that you've got so that you can refer to it, perhaps float it to others, that it's not the same GIS world that we had 15, even 5 years ago, right? That has implications to what we need to learn with GIS, how we need to go forward as a community, how we need to be lifelong learners. I also have a couple of phrases here that you can grapple with on your own about lifelong learning and some other things that are in the weforum.org, the World Economic Forum site. I think it's insightful, and it has implications for us as the GIS community. In short, the tools, the workforce, and GIS education are all rapidly and simultaneously changing. So how can we deal with that? How can we grapple with that? One of the things that I contribute to is research in GIS education. So here's one of my articles. So one of the reasons why I do that is because I want to be in those conversations with educators. To do that, I need to show that I'm an active researcher in those communities. So they don't see, oh, Joseph is at Esri. He's just pushing tools. He's just a software vendor. No, I'm an educator, and I want to be in those conversations and serve on advisory boards and listen to people's needs and challenges and so on. So this is one of the contributions that I've made, along with the many contributions that you all have made in this space. Now, what and how should students learn geotechnologies in our decade and beyond? Is it just this set of tools? I think you know where I'm probably going to go with this. No, it's not just buffering and integrating models with Python, et cetera, et cetera. My colleague here at Esri, who's now at Penn State, David DiBiase, wrote a very insightful article about stop teaching GIS. It's kind of a rocking the boat sort of a title for an article, but the point that David was raising is that we have been, as a community, focused on helping people learn GIS software for many years. And for good reason. It was difficult software to learn. It required a lot of patience and diligence. And as you know, continued updates for your skill set. And those pieces are still important. We still need to understand how to use tools that will help us to be successful on the job. But what David was bringing up was that we need to teach about spatial thinking and problem solving as well. So that's something you might want to take a look at. Helping students learn, how do community colleges, workplaces, technical colleges, universities, tribal colleges, and others actually help students to do that. I don't want to spend time, and you don't want to hear me talk about the over-reliance on standardized testing that maybe your kids or you had an experience in K-12 education where you had to memorize, maybe even in your undergraduate days, even in grad school, and regurgitate blocks of content for tests. We're still overly relying on that. And I would argue that we need to not over-rely on those. There's certain things that you should have up here, no doubt about it. Certain content knowledge that you should actually have memorized, so that when you get a report about wildfire extent that was the size of Connecticut, you have a vague idea, at least, of what the size of Connecticut actually is, and so on. But we over-rely on that. I would argue that we need to get away from that and focus on problem-based learning. Okay, one of the things that is engaging to people using geotechnologies in education is that there's always a higher, more noble goal. And I'll give you a real simple example. So a colleague and I created this in the context of education. How can story maps be used to teach about and preserve indigenous languages? So we wanted to have the students understand the English word and the Lakota word for, and I'm not sure you're hearing the audio here, but the point is visualize. I've got an audio clip for about 25 features, natural and cultural features on the landscape. Hill, Paha, Lake, Oikago, etc. Okay. The short-term goal was to help students to understand how to create story maps with how to get those photos on the right points, etc., and how to create the links to the audio files that my colleague narrated and I placed online. But the longer, bigger, higher, more noble goal was this. Many indigenous languages around the world, as you probably are aware, are endangered. There's the average age maybe in the 60s for people speaking it, so the younger people aren't learning that language, and then what happens in a generation? Also, I wanted to encourage, if we can do this with short audio clips, couldn't we have whole tribal elders conversations in a story map about why this place matters, why that place matters, what happened here in what we can do to build resiliency in our soil science in this location in the future, etc. So that was the higher, more noble goal. So that's what attracts a lot of educators and others to using geotechnologies. It's the bigger goals. Geotechnologies helps us to achieve these higher, more noble goals. And that's just one of many examples that I'm going to share today. Also, a couple of educational points. As GIS evolves, it becomes more powerful and easier to use. And if your GIS is not becoming easier to use over time, you need to ask questions of your GIS software provider. Why isn't it more easy to use as time goes on? Also, when you're teaching others in your workplace, or maybe some of you serve as an adjunct instructor, or you're a mentor to your kid's school or the school down the street, etc. And I'll talk about those other ways in a bit. But you don't need to actually create everything yourself. There's no shortage of lessons, and I'll illustrate some of these that are available for you to use as you go into educational settings, even in your own workplace. If you're tasked to, hey, 2 weeks from Friday, you need to teach a GIS workshop for the assessors over in the county assessors department. Maybe you're over in Parks and Rec. Okay, what do you do? How do you deal with that? You don't have to create it all yourself. Also, I really like this Geospatial Technology Competency Model. Many of you know this. The Geotech Center is a group of community colleges that came together and said, we need a model that helps us to guide instructors for courses and how to build programs in community colleges especially. But what I really like is it organizes this competency model in a format where you and I can actually use it to assess our own skills, for example. So, for example, I would advocate every quarter or every 6 months, go to this and see where are your gaps in your own geospatial journey. I really like the personal effectiveness competencies that you can see on the bottom here. Are you ethical? Can you deal with data? Are you organized? All that sort of personal skill sets need to be there. So that's why it's on the bottom tier of the pyramid. So it's a good assessment to figure out where your gaps are and then figure out, okay, where do you need to fill those? How can you fill those gaps and where can you fill those gaps?